It's the EP Podcast. Evergreen Park.
Sitting down here at the 9-foot homemade oak bar. He's been here before. We normally talk about planting trees because Evergreen plants so many of them and takes care of them in your area. But Gavin Yeaman's here to talk about pipes, which is very different. I would think the only time that trees and pipes interact, it is a bad thing. How are you?
I'm good. And it does feel different. And I think I would rather be here talking about trees, to be honest with you.
And speaking of pipes, I mean, I'll start right off with it. There was a water main break right in front of the house here on 99th over the MLK holiday weekend.
Yeah.
And I know that there's been a lot of them, and they happen all the time. They happen to the point where I knew when that break happened that even though I switched the bottled water right away because I wanted to make sure with the kids, I remembered that a break had happened right in that area in front of that neighbor's house a couple years ago. And it looked very similar. And I remember being told the water flows this way, your house isn't affected. But like it is an issue. Like pipes get old. And that's, I think, what we're going to talk about today. I mean, I just had this thing, Gavin, I was telling you before we sat down, where I had a plumber come in because a pipe had kind of disintegrated underneath the kitchen sink. And there was water leaking through. So he fixes that pipe, and the next one, as he's making the attachment, disintegrates. And the next one disintegrates. And then the ones that are leading up as a vent all the way to the roof kind of cave in. And a little project turned into like $1,000 project in the house. And he was explaining to me, like, look, these pipes were never meant to last forever. You know, eventually there's a shelf life, especially for these lead pipes and the ones, all the metal pipes. They only last so long, and all the houses in Evergreen are going to eventually need to be repiped because they're all about the same age.
Right.
And I would imagine it's the same for what's going on underneath the ground.
Exactly right. Like you first started talking about the water main break. When we do get those really, really cold temperatures, the frost starts pushing into the ground. You get some depth of the frost. So the ground starts to expand. The water in the main is cold, which, makes the steel a little more brittle. So you get those forces kind of acting on the mains, and that's when we typically do see those main breaks, is when you have those extended cold temperatures. But yeah, to go off of what you said about the lead pipes, this has kind of come about because of everybody remembers the, what happened in Flint, Michigan.
Yeah, bad water out there.
Right, and the tragedy took place where they had elevated lead levels and all that in their water. So I think that's what spurred on legislators to kind of pass this new law at both the state and federal levels that kind of mandates the village to start replacing lead services.
Okay, and here's the thing. I remember you were telling me about this. I would imagine a lot of people are going to react to it the same way. Wait a minute, the pipes are lead? Because you just assume, because lead is bad, that everything's been redone for a long time. But if you think about when the water system was put in, and we brought people in from the Evergreen Park water department before, this system has been around for a long time. The water's really coming from Chicago, like 98%, with the exception of like a couple of blocks that I want to say are over in the southeast quadrant. They run through a water facility here in Evergreen. Some of them get it directly from the city, those that 2% of homes or whatever that's over in that section. But this system has been in place for a long time. So back then, they're using materials that you wouldn't put in the ground or touch your water. But those things are still there. It's still running through those pipes.
Correct. When Evergreen was built, unfortunately, we followed the Chicago Plumbing Code, and the city of Chicago used lead water services because it was easy to work with. It was flexible, and they ran it underground into your house. And, we really haven't had too much problems over the years with them. But, yeah, as you mentioned, they're aging. We're now mandated to remove them. So that's what we're here to talk about today, is how we're going to go about this.
Okay, and what's interesting about this, before we get into how you're going to do it, but you're going to redo all the piping in Evergreen Park underground. Is that the basic gist of this?
Correct. So the water service, we'll back it up a bit. So every home has a water service that connects from the water main and comes inside your house.
So you're talking about the pipe that's going to come from the main pipe, like let's say that's running down the road. I envision everything like the video game SimCity. You ever play SimCity?
Sure.
Okay, and you got to put in water pipes and feed them to the homes. So you run a big giant thing down the street, and that's what I've always felt is going on there, because whenever there's a water main break, it seems to be along a curb area or something like that. So there's probably a pipe that runs all the way down 99th, and a pipe that turns down Holman, and a pipe that turns down Turner, and so on and so forth. And every one of these streets has a water main pipe that runs along, and then there's a connection from that takes it from there to the home. So are you just replacing from there to the home?
And yes, that's the water service, as
Okay.
we know it, from the pipe, the water main into the house. But actually on the water service, there's actually two sides. There's what we call the public side and the private side. So the public side is owned by the municipality from the water main to that shutoff that's out in most people's parkway.
Okay.
And then the other side of that, from that valve into the house, is the actual homeowner's portion.
That's the stuff that's part of my house. Like
Right.
where the plumber came over and said, your pipes probably will need to be replaced at some point. That's that portion.
Right. So that valve out in the parkway is where the ownership switches.
So you're saying you're taking everything up to that valve.
Well, we're actually going to actually offer the whole thing.
Oh, okay.
The private side and the public side.
Okay. And that would run up until where it gets in my house?
Correct.
Or you're not replacing anything in my house?
Right.
Okay.
And we would stop in the house where the water meter typically
Okay.
is.
So I know where that's like the corner of the front corner of my basement.
Right.
I see a water meter that comes in. There's a line that comes in. You would take it right up to that point.
Yeah, that's where most people's comes in, is in the basement, in the front of the house.
Okay. So you'd be replacing everything that's from the house out to where the main is in the street?
Right. And like I said,
Not the main. You're not replacing the main.
correct. Just from the main into the house.
Okay, this sounds huge. Like,
It is.
I'm going to tell you something right now. Like, I mean, like right now people are listening to this and they're going, uh-oh. Because I get that things need to be replaced. You're saying this is a mandated thing. So explain that a little bit to me, because right now there's somebody saying they're not digging up my lawn. So I explain this to me.
Right. And it is mandated. In our project, we've been given 20 years to replace to do this project throughout town. So 20 years we have 6,500 estimated lead services. So that works out to be about 300 a year.
Okay.
So what we're planning to do is break the town down in areas and like enroll residents into the program. And that's where we'll be working for a matter of time, is in one project area.
Okay. So this will be slow.
Right.
Right now, somebody is listening to this. It could be 10 years from now when they get to your house. It could be 15 years when they get to your
Correct.
house. But eventually this is going to happen.
It is.
Okay. And what is the purpose of replacing that section when I would imagine, like, and correct me if I'm wrong, the main might also need to be replaced? How old is that? Like, am I changing one section, but it doesn't really matter because the water's been flowing through all these other pipes before it gets to there? What's the difference in those pipes?
You're right. They're all about the same age, but the difference is most of the water mains are made of steel, whereas the services are lead. And
Okay, so that's the thing. It's not running through lead all the way up to that point. It's running
Correct.
through steel. We're taking the lead out.
That's exactly right.
Okay, all right. A lot of that makes sense to me. Okay, so we're taking the lead out. Anything that's lead has to be taken out. The lead portion is from the main to your house, and so that's what you're going to change. The houses don't really have lead in them anymore, right? Or does the homeowner, after they do this, sit there and think to themselves, well, if I went through all this trouble with the one thing getting replaced, I probably should change what's in my house?
Well, they might want to start thinking about that anyway, like you mentioned, for the age factor. But most people's homes in Evergreen, when they were built, they're galvanized steel inside the house.
Okay, so really the only lead that the water's probably running through, most likely, is this section from the main to the house.
Exactly.
And it's happening in all these Evergreen Park homes. Like you said, there's like about 6,500 of them that would have to be replaced over 20 years.
Yes.
And this is your thing. I feel so bad for you.
Well, yeah.
Like, I mean, honestly, Gavin, I feel really, really bad for you.
Yeah, this project is one that keeps you awake at night.
I mean,
for
like,
sure.
this sounds crazy to me. So, all right. So we're going to replace this. The obvious question is, when you get started, is it voluntary if somebody wants to dive right into it? Or are you just going to pick a section and just inform these people we're coming this year?
Well, a little bit of both. So we've already informed one area of town, and that would be like the western half of the northwest quadrant. So
Okay.
Millard to Harding, 91st to 95th Street. That's going to be Project Area 1. And we've sent out a lot of information to those residents. We've enrolled, I think we're approaching 300 now. And that would be like first summer's workload right there already. So, yeah, we are in communication with them. The project's going out to bid. So we should know here shortly about who the contractor
So the
would be.
village isn't going to do it. You guys are going to bid out a contractor to do it.
Yeah, to start out, we've taken out a zero interest loan to get started.
Okay.
So we're going to start by hiring a contractor.
And it makes sense to do that because if they don't do a good job, or you like, we could have been done by somebody better, you can switch. You're not going to be. Are you going to be linked to this contractor for 20 years, or is it something where it's
No, we would be just in individual project areas.
project areas?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, all right. So now, let's say I'm in that quadrant, or I'm in a future quadrant, and you tell me it's time to replace this pipe. The first thing I think of is, my lawn's going to be destroyed. There's going to be a lot of digging. And what's my house going to look like, and when am I going to have to repair? So can you take that?
Okay.
Explain that one to me. I mean, or are you just able to kind of like make a hole, rip the pipe out, run it back under the ground, and there's not a lot of damage? Like, what are we looking at?
Most of the damage will be out in the street and in the parkway.
Okay.
So on the lawns, we shouldn't experience any damage. There will be one small intrusion in the house. So like where your lead service comes up, probably out of the basement floor.
Mine's above ground, which is amazing. Like I have one, my pipe, I believe, comes in through the side, which is really weird.
Oh, through the side of the wall?
Through the wall. But I know that not everybody has that.
Right. Well,
I have that, and I remember when I bought the house, my dad was like, ooh, look at that. Because if something burst, it's easier to fix. And that was like one of the things that he pointed out.
Like my house comes up out of the floor. It comes up. So whatever your situation is, that's most likely how the new service is going to come in. So there will be a little intrusion in the house. So like at my house where it comes up out of the floor, there would have to be a small hole broken in the concrete in the basement. There will be a hole out in the street, like I mentioned, above the water main. And then there'll be a hole in the parkway where that valve is. So the contractors are not going to open trench cut this with like a machine. They're going to directional bore this underground.
Okay.
And that'll really cut back on the restoration and the damage to people's lawns because they're just going to be underground and it'll come up in the basement. So, and that's how the new service will get in.
All right. So here's the obvious question. You're going to run into somebody like me because I'm a jerk. I mean, I got to be honest. Like, I'm all for this. Like, I actually think this is a good idea, right? You take lead out of the water. That's a good thing. Things need to be replaced. I understand. I wouldn't do this. But I remember one time I had like the meters. They wanted to change my meter in the front so they could just drive by and hit it. And they kept wanting to come into my house and they wanted to put in new equipment. And I think the first time I asked a question of the company that was doing it, they just wouldn't answer my question. And I was like, well, then you're not coming to my house. So you're going to have people who are going to sit there and say, I don't want you digging a hole in my basement. You know, you're going to run into that. So how do you approach that? Because it's something that's necessary, it's something that's mandated, it's something that you have to do. So how do you approach that?
Well, our understanding is right now, if a resident does not want to participate, eventually we will just have to get a waiver from that resident saying that they refused.
Right.
And
you could wait 15 years because they might sell their house and the new person would actually do it too. I mean, like, think about that. Like, I mean, I've been in this house 19 years. I'm not going to be in this house probably 20 years from now. I mean, like, my kids are older or whatever, right? So I'm sure I won't be here the entire run of this thing, right? So then you would also run into the idea of, okay, this homeowner didn't want to do it. Now their house is up for sale. Before the new family moves in, we're going to do this. Like, you know.
Right. And here's what I would say to those people is eventually, and I think it sounds like it's already starting to make its way into this transaction, but if you have a lead service, that's going to have to be disclosed when you sell your house.
Okay.
So that, a lead service is actually going to be a negative in your sale price.
It's going to be a detriment.
Right. Whereas if you have a new copper water service, that would be, an asset to your sale price.
Does this cost me anything?
Yeah. Right now we're asking, since like I said, part of it historically or typically is the homeowner's responsibility from that valve into the house. The village is looking to add that all into one project. So right now we're thinking the village is going to be covering 80% of the cost, and we would ask the homeowner to pay 20%.
Okay.
Which is that's still a lot of money.
Yeah.
But to further reduce that burden, they can pay that percentage over a 20-year period.
Oh. So you can just make installments, any interest on that or no?
No.
Okay, so I can zero interest, slow installment, pay for this if I wanted to.
So in our first project area, our internal estimates are that this is $10,000 per house.
Wow. Okay, so what you're going to be looking for is $2,000.
Correct. And even then, we're offering an incentive if they want to pay up front. We're offering them then the total cost for them would be $1,900, or it would be $100 when it's
$100 a year for 20 years.
Correct.
I mean, if you tell me $100 a year for 20 years to have
clean
water and I can sell the house, then I think that would be something that that would probably be the option most people would end up taking.
Right, because if you choose not to, and then you have your home for sale, if if they're trying to get a price on their own to replace the water service, like if a new buyer's like, I got to see how much this would cost.
They're going to say it's 10 grand. They're going to want 10 grand, and they're going to want 10 grand off of what the price of the house
and that's
is.
probably more, to be honest with you, because we've seen people pay up to $17,000 just for the private side.
Right.
So we'll have.
This isn't that bad. $100 a year for 20 years doesn't feel as bad when I think about the fact that I just signed up for a dating app and it cost me $50.
Right. now we know that like costs go up too.
Right.
So we're kind of
but I'm locked in at my 100 a year, right?
Right, you are.
Okay.
So we're thinking when we move to a new project, we're going to try to stay right at that 20% of what the estimated cost is.
Okay. Now let's say I'm somebody who's like, okay, then get this done now. Like, is there a way for somebody to say, like, I don't want to wait 10 years till you get to this? Is that available or no?
The only problem with that right now is the funding. A lot of the funding sources that we're chasing to kind of keep this cost down, grants and, like I said, interest-free loans. A lot of them have stipulations about where in town they can be used.
Okay.
So that's how we have to kind of build these project areas. This first funding source, this loan, it only about half of Evergreen Park qualifies to be used in that.
Okay.
So within that project area, we kind of help break it down further by where we want to dig in the streets that are the oldest streets. We don't want to pave roads and then tear them all up again. So we want to try to focus on areas where we can.
This makes sense. You're going to cause damage to the street.
Right.
If you're going to eventually be over there fixing that street in the near future, you might as well cause the damage, fix it, not be like, oh, we just put a street in here and now we're going to damage it the next year.
Exactly right.
I get that. That makes an awful lot of sense. All right. So a lot of people listening to this may not be contacted by the village for a decade or so. That's what this sounds like. Like some people are going to deal with this now. Some people are going to deal with this way off in the future because there's only so many homes that you can do and only so many sections you can work on.
Correct. I mean, they might be getting information from us about future and how we're moving along, like when we have an update to give. But right, we'll be kind of focusing on one area where we're working, and then we'll also be reaching out to the next area to kind of be planning and doing things like that.
Kind of work ahead.
Right.
Any reaction so far? Like, I mean, I'm sure you've gotten the gamut of reactions. You've gotten people going, okay, this makes perfect sense. And you've had people go, what? Like, I mean, I need to start paying you for this pipe and I don't want it replaced. I mean, like, I'm sure you're running into all those things.
I've been pleasantly surprised though in the first project area. We've enrolled almost 300 residents since December. I think December 1st is when we first kind of rolled out this information. So we've had a pretty good response over there.
People are understanding of what's happening.
Yeah,
I think you know what? It's normally $10,000. You're probably going to have to get this done anyway. We're going to pick up 80% of the cost, and you can pay me the other $2,000 over 20 years.
Exactly.
That really softens because trust me, when you said I had to pay $2,000, I was going to leap across this bar, you Gavin. You know, I'm poor. I got 3 kids in school.
Right.
What the heck? I got one at Rice. I got one at the University of Illinois, and the other guy's going to Redeemer. I'm looking at you like $2,000.
Exactly right. Like
Gavin,
I said,
we're not going to eat here.
It is an expensive project.
I'm a single parent for crying out loud who's not getting any child support. Like, what the heck?
But yeah, we're leaving no stone unturned about funding sources and looking for things like that. So we're out there shaking the bushes to try to find federal, state money to keep this cost low.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's very interesting. I mean, like, it's an undertaking, this project. I'm sure when it was handed to you, you were like, oh, man. like one of those, and you're going to be dealing with this thing for a while, and it's a hard thing to explain. So I think it's a good thing that you came on and kind of talked about it on the podcast, because what I'm getting is not only is it necessary for your health, but it's something that's required that has to be done. It's something that's going to devalue your home if you don't get it done in the future. And if you did this on your own, it would cost you a lot more money, and it would all be up front compared to how the village is handling it.
Right. And you mentioned the health, and I definitely don't want to cause any kind of alarm, because historically our lead testing has always been below the maximum amount.
Yeah. I mean, we had the water department come in here and test the water here in this house and talk about it. So yes.
Yeah. And that's part of it too. We've had to increase our testing locations. We've had to increase our amount of times in a year we test for lead. So that all kind of goes hand in hand, but they kind of are changing the guidelines on us. Used to have like a safe level of lead in the water. Now they're changing it to say where there's no safe level of lead
Right.
So nothing's really changed with our water source per se, but they're just changing what, their recommendations are.
I get it, Gavin. I mean, like, first they tell you there's a safe level of lead. Now you go out in the world and everybody's crazy. You're like, maybe nobody should have any lead.
Exactly.
Maybe that's the problem. Maybe there's too much damn lead. So, okay, sounds good. Interesting stuff. Any questions? Can people reach out to you? I mean,
Yeah,
I'm gonna give out the information. You're going to be inundated with calls from areas that you're not going to get to for 10 years. So
That's
I'm
okay.
worried about doing that to you.
That's
But
okay.
Yeah. Okay.
No, we have a website they could check out at gettheleadoutil.com.
Okay.
That's our engineer that's working with us on this project. That's their site, but it has a lot of information about lead in the water. It has information actually for our first project area, which a lot of it's geared towards, but it might be beneficial for someone down the road to see how we're progressing over in that first project area. For people in our first project area, if they haven't signed up, they can sign up on that website too.
And they're basically signing up for when they want it done, or
they're signing up to say, I'm interested
in it.
Yeah.
Because like you said, otherwise it's going to be a waiver. Otherwise, like if they don't want to do this thing, this is a cost they'll take on eventually on their own.
Correct.
Right. Okay. That makes an awful lot of sense. Gavin Yeaman from the Village. I mean, it's a lot, but I mean, I think you explained it pretty well, and you handle all the stuff that I asked you, and you somehow convinced me that I want my pipe replaced at $100 a year. Like I'm ready, even though my quadrant, if you started over there, I'm not going to see you for a while.
But that could all change. Maybe a different funding source would be used in this area.
Here's the funny thing. As time goes on, people may forget about this. You may have to come back and explain this again.
No problem.
Thanks so much, buddy.
All right, thanks.
It's the EP Podcast. All things Evergreen Park. It's the EP Podcast. Evergreen Park.